Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for being here to celebrate. Today, I will be discussing with you guys the ethics and laws of war that are stated in the Torah. Let's go all the way back to the reason that I first chose this topic. First off, I would like to say that I'm very lucky to have 3 amazing grandparents, one of which I call Papi. Ever since I was a toddler, I loved watching movies with my Papi, aka Pinchas. As I got older, my interests expanded and I started watching new genres. I remember I was 8 years old when I watched my first war movie. It was called The Magnificent Seven. Now to me, this wasn't just any movie. It was an experience. It opened up new pathways into my imagination and I wanted more of it. As I got older, the movies I watched with my papi got more serious. He would tell me stories of his father, who had been a war hero in the Holocaust, and I was always a good listener when it came to papi's stories. There were many topics that I could have chosen, but I felt that this one was the most spiritual towards my family and I. So let's dive deeper, shall we? The Torah was given to the Jewish people approximately 3,500 years ago on Mount Sinai. It contains many laws that are called mitzvot, and that tell us about how the Jewish people should act. A big part of Judaism is halakha. Halakha is the practical side of the Torah. It means to walk because the Torah's laws are supposed to guide us through rough times, including war and battle. Another aspect of the Torah is about the ethics of Judaism. And by looking at the mitzvot around war, we can learn about the Jewish ethics as well. The basic laws can be found in the book of Devarim, chapter 20. These laws were given to the Jews living in the Sinai desert for 40 years, after having left Egypt. They were about to enter the land of Israel, but before doing so, their leader Moshe had to give them guidance about how to wage war to conquer the land that God had promised them. In verses 1 through 4, the Kohen, or priest in English, tells them to not be afraid of war because God is on their side. This is important because before the people went out to fight, they may have been afraid. The Kohen, who is the spiritual leader of the Jewish people, would remind them that in Judaism, it's not the number of soldiers or the type of weapons that cause an army to win. Instead, the same God who miraculously took us out of Egypt, despite all odds, would ensure our victory entering the land of Israel. As the priest says, Devarim chapter 20, verse 4, Shi Hashem Elohim haholech imachem lehilchem lachem im oivehem lehoshia etchem. For it is the Lord, your God, who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring you victory. Going to war is not something physical, but a religious act. And in order to emerge victorious, prayer is something that is mandatory. We trust and rely on God and not our physical strength. Who exactly does need to go to war? The assumption was that all body men would participate in this mitzvah. The Torah goes on in verses 5 through 8 to tell us that there are exceptions and some people don't have to wage war. The first exception is if someone has built a house but has not yet lived in it. The second exception is if you have planted a vineyard and have not yet made wine from it. The third exception is if you're engaged but not yet married. The similarities between these is if a soldier was missing out on an important life experience, they would be distracted and wouldn't fight well, so the Torah exempts them from the war. The last exception is if you're afraid. Now, I was very confused as to why this was one of the reasons to be exempt from war. I soon came to realize that if you're afraid, then that fear can spread throughout your peers, which could cause really serious consequences for the whole army. To protect the success of the war, if a few people are afraid, then it's better for them not to fight. In verses 10, we see one of the important rules around the ethics of war. The Torah says, quote, Ki tikrav el ir lahilchem alea ve'karata alea l'shalom. When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. This rule means that we can't ambush an enemy army, and always have to allow them to surrender before attacking. This is an example of the fact that while the Torah doesn't forbid war, it places limits on how we can wage it. And even something as bloody as war still has its rules and ethics about how to do it properly. Another example of the ethics of war follows immediately after. If an enemy refuses to surrender, then it is permitted to kill enemy soldiers. But even then, the Torah does not allow soldiers to kill children, women, or animals of the enemy. Finally, there are some nations that are sworn enemies and should be wiped out because of how they treated the Jewish people in the desert, along with the fact that they worshipped idols and also risked causing the Jews to forget God and worship those idols instead. In a few minutes, we'll ask the question about wiping out these nations. The rabbis applied the lessons from the original war to enter the land of Israel into future laws of battle. Famously, these laws are written down by the great Rabbi Maimonides 900 years ago in the Mishnah Torah, or Code of Law. The rabbis understood that not all wars should be treated equally, and they broke them down into two categories. The first one being an obligatory war, or Mitzvah. This is a war that must be fought. The main example of this nowadays would be protecting the land of Israel from foreign invasions. The second one is an optional war, Milchamet Reshut. This is a war that isn't mandatory and might include trying to expand your country's ground. While the Torah permits both types of wars, there is a much stronger requirement to take part in defense rather than offense. For example, while for offensive wars, Milchamet Reshut, the Torah only obligates healthy men between the ages of 20 and 60 years old. When it comes to defensive wars, Milchamet Mitzvah, everyone, including women and older adults, are obligated in this mitzvah. While the modern state of Israel is a democracy whose rules aren't always identical to the Torah, this idea of the different types of wars plays an important role on Israeli life. When Israel was established as a country in 1948, just 3 years after the end of the Holocaust, the government had to decide what kind of army they would have. They named it the Tzahal, or Tzva Haganah LeIsrael, which means the Israel Defense Forces. The charter of the Tzahal, or IDF, is only to engage in defensive wars based on the idea from the Torah. There's one more area of the Torah that discusses a difficult but important topic of war, and that is how the Jewish soldiers entering the land of Israel would be allowed to treat women on the enemy side. The Torah realizes that soldiers in war are more likely to give in to the worst temptations. Because of this, in chapter 21 of the book Devarim, we learn about what should happen if a soldier takes a female captive of war, a female prisoner of war. The concern is that the soldiers would abuse these women. The Torah says that the soldiers are able to marry these women, but in a very unusual manner. Our commentaries explain that war unleashes a very ugly part of the human soul. Saying that the male soldiers cannot be with the female captives may not be effective, so instead there is a drawn-out process. First, the soldier would have to wait a month and make a decision at a time when the captives didn't look their best. This is a way for the soldiers to slow down and not make any irrational or bad decisions. If after this they still choose to marry these captive women, they must treat them with the utmost respect and not like slaves. To modern ears, these rules may sound very out of date, but it's important to remember the historical context around them. When these rules were given at Mount Sinai, most nations fought without any code of ethics or restrictions on captives. These rules were some of the first to create a code of ethics in war in the entire world. Now that we've learned some of the basic concepts around war, we should pause and ask the question, is war ethical? Does the Torah allow people to take other people's lives under any circumstances? When God first created humanity, the Torah writes, Bereshit/Genesis 1-27, Vayivra Elokim et ha'adama betzalmo, betzelem Elokim bara oto. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. This is unique among all of God's creations. Humanity is the only creation referred to as being B'Tselem Elohim, or in the divine image. Based on this idea, it seems as though killing another person is almost like hurting God. This idea is best expressed by the rabbis in the Talmud, who write that saving one's life is like saving the entire world, and taking one's life is like destroying the entire world. If the Torah isn't clear enough, the first story after Adam and Chava is the story of two brothers, Cain and Heva. When Cain kills his brother, God is furious. Bereshit/Genesis 4-10. Ma asita kol demei achicha tzoakim elei min ha'adama. What have you done? The sound of your brother's blood is screaming to me from the earth. God's anger at Cain for killing his brother is intense, which reminds us about how serious a halakha, or legal and ethical problem, murder really is. The prohibition is codified in the Ten Commandments themselves, where it says, Lo tirtzah, do not murder. So if that's the case, how is there ever a justification for killing in war? It's clear that not all killing in the Torah is considered unethical. The prohibition in the Ten Commandments is not to murder. Murder is a specific type of killing that can't be defended on ethical grounds. Taking a human life is one of the most serious actions anyone could ever do, and the Torah gives us different values that balance each other out when deciding whether one is permitted to do so. Self-defense is almost always permitted. Killing for personal gain is always forbidden. And our tradition goes into hundreds of examples in situations that fall somewhere in between. Over the past number of months, I've learned lots of ideas that I didn't know much about before, and how it relates to the Torah and the real world. I used to watch videos about old wars and hear about the impact of World War II and the Holocaust on my family. But for the first time, I was able to learn about what the Jewish tradition has to say about it, and how these ideas have impacted the Jewish people from the time of the Torah 3,500 years ago all the way up to now. While earlier I only thought about war through the movies I had seen, as I started to dive deeper into my learning, I started to think more about the code of ethics in war and how the values of the Torah and Judaism translate into every aspect of life. One big goal that I have moving forward is to not stop my Torah learning here. I want to pass my tradition on to my kids when the time comes, and I hope to do more aliyot and drashot in the near future. There are a few people who I would like to thank for helping me arrive at this moment. First off, I would like to thank my mom for always loving me and putting me first, in spite of me being a pain sometimes. I hope you know that I always love you, and you're an amazing role model to me and Levi. And I will always try to be the same rock for you that you are for me. I love you so much. And to my dad, you're the one to introduce me to among other things, sports, which became a major part of my life. For as long as I can remember, you were always there, playing with me. I will always cherish the time that we have together. I love you. Thank you to my papi, or Pinchas, for always making me laugh. No matter what we're doing, I've loved working with you on everything bar mitzvah related. Even though I know we've had our struggles, I've loved doing it with you, and I wouldn't rather change it for anyone else in the entire world. Thank you. Thank you to my grandpa Warren for always loving me just the way I am and allowing me to indulge in silly acts of funniness with you. Thank you for showing me the world in a different way from your sailboat. I also admire your musical banjo side so much. And even though I don't play an instrument, I still think that we should make a band together. I love you so much. Thank you. Thank you to my grandpa Mark for always helping me and giving me encouragement about being the best. All those days that you were tough on me when it came to math really ended up helping. The encouragement really helped. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to my grandma Mila for always supporting me and my whole family through COVID. With COVID especially, we got a lot closer as you had to suffer through my schooling. Without you, my whole daily routine would be thrown off. P.S. Thank you for taking me to all those doctor's appointments that I loved, especially the shots. I love those even more. Thank you. Thank you to my grandma Clava for never starving me. I know that I'll always gain a couple of pounds whenever I'm at your house, but me and my brother think that it's super sweet how you try to take care of us and always want us fed. I love you so much. Thank you to my brother Levi for always being my best friend. I hope you know that I always have your back, no matter what. I know that you think I'm annoying, but it's all out of love, just remember that. And I really do think you're a great partner in everything I do, and I love you to the moon and back. Thank you, Rabbi Albert, for helping me with this speech. I know that I can always talk to you about anything Torah-related and not Torah-related. Without you, I wouldn't have any of this, so thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Wilgil, for helping me with my aliyah and learning how to read from the Torah. This is a skill that I'll have for the rest of my life and I'll never forget. Thank you to all my friends because I know you guys have my back no matter what. You guys mean the world to me. And of course, thank you all of you for taking time out of your day to come and be a part of my bar mitzvah. Thank you and Shabbat Shalom.
Yes,
Yes, sure.